Why was the room so quiet when her name came up? Felt every pair of eyes at the briefing table slide toward her. Not directly, never directly. That would have been too honest. Instead, they glanced, then looked away, like people watching the edge of a storm they hoped wouldn't reach them. She sat stiff in her chair, spine straight, jaw clenched, hands folded on the notepad she hadn't written a single word in. Major's voice carried through the room, even though he wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His disdain was loud enough. "Sergeant First Class," he said, almost as if the rank itself offended him. "I'll be clear. She has no business leading mine clearance on this operation. None." There was no hesitation, no softness. Just a final judgment handed down like a sentence. The room stayed still, too still. Didn't blink. She refused to give him the satisfaction. Went on. "Women crack under this kind of pressure. Statistics don't lie. EOD is already a gamble. Throw biology into it and you're asking for failure." Something twisted in her gut, sharp as broken glass. She kept her face calm, but inside her chest the words burned. Crack under pressure. Biology. Failure. She could still hear her mother's voice warning her years ago. "There will be men who look at you and see weakness before you open your mouth. Don't waste your breath arguing. Let your work answer." The work, always the work. And yet at that table, surrounded by men who knew damn well what she had done on past deployments, nobody said a word. Not one. Even Commander, the SEAL team leader she had pulled out of fire twice in the last 6 months, sat with arms crossed, eyes forward, offering nothing. Not defense, not support, nothing. She told herself she didn't need it. She told herself she didn't care. But a voice inside, quiet, raw, reminded her she did. Highlighted her name on the digital roster, the glow of the screen painting his face pale blue. "She'll remain on equipment maintenance until further notice. Someone else can take the walk." That was the end of it. Just like that, 4 tours of proven work, a record of calm under fire that made seasoned operators whisper her name with respect, dismissed with a stroke of arrogance. Sat there breathing slow, counting the rhythm the way she did when she probed the soil for hidden pressure plates. In, out, in, out. No sudden moves, no explosion. But she could feel the tremor under the surface. Later in the equipment bay, she tried to bury it. She laid every tool on the steel table in front of her. Wire cutters, prodding rods, small brushes, safety pins. Each piece gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light. She checked them once, twice, then again, as if the repetition could smooth out the edges inside her. Sweat rolled down her back, the Afghan sun turning the bay into an oven. But she worked like the heat didn't exist. The tools had order. The tools had logic. Unlike people, tools didn't judge. They just did what they were made to do. The younger specialists drifted around her, quiet, watchful. She could feel them studying her hands. She knew the whispers that followed her name, the calm one, the steady one, the woman whose nerves never broke. They wanted to understand how she stayed so still when the world shook. She wanted to tell them it wasn't a gift, it was a wound. Her mother's face lived in every movement. Diana, Army EOD. Her mother's hands had taught her the rituals of discipline. Her mother's sacrifice had taught her what fear truly meant. 16 years old, standing at a coffin she wasn't allowed to open. A funeral director apologizing, saying there wasn't enough left for anything but a closed casket. Had stared at the flag folded on top and promised herself one thing: she would master the devices that had stolen her mother. She would not be paralyzed by the fear that had killed others. That promise was what carried her through Fort Lee, where instructors sneered about her carrying 80-pound bomb suits and joked about her delicate fingers. That promise carried her through hours of drills, sweat soaking through her uniform, legs buckling under weight no one believed she could hold. It carried her to the top of her class, first among men who doubled her size. She had memorized every line of her mother's notebooks, the ones with smudged ink and coffee stains, filled with sketches of IED designs, scribbled notes about enemy tricks, underlined warnings about pressure plate variances, pages that weren't doctrine but survival. And now, with 5 deployments behind her, she knew more about mines than the men who doubted her ever would. Yet here she was, pushed to the side, relegated to checking gear like a trainee. That night, lying on her bunk, she stared at the photograph she kept taped to the wall. Her mother in desert gear, smiling, unaware of the street that would take her life days later. Fists tightened at her sides. It wasn't the danger she hated. It was the waste. The waste of her skills while less experienced specialists stumbled into risks she could have neutralized in half the time. The waste of silence in that briefing room where men who knew better chose careers over truth. Her hands trembled, not in fear but rage, rage she couldn't show, rage that sat under the skin burning. At 300 the call came. Emergency priority. A SEAL team had walked into an old Soviet minefield. The words cut through her sleep like a blade. She sat up, boots half on before the voice finished over the comms. Point man heard a click. Pressure plate engaged. 6 men frozen in the field. By the time she reached the operations center, the room was chaos. Maps spread across screens, chatter breaking into fragments, coordinates, Soviet designations, estimates. The SEALs stood in a pattern on the feed, night vision green making them look like ghosts. One wrong twitch, and 6 lives would end. Was pale, he called in his senior specialists. Both walked in, looked at the screen, and walked right back out. Too dense, one muttered. No way through. Protocol said call and write off the team. But nobody in that room believed writing off a SEAL team was an option. Not politically, not morally. Stood in the corner, silent, she knew the layout. She had studied these patterns in her mother's notes. Soviet fields weren't random. They had design, logic, rhythm. She could see it in the grainy image, the gaps that weren't chance but structure. There was a way through, a dangerous, agonizing way, but a way. She opened her mouth, closed it. Was preparing to deliver the order no one wanted to hear. That 6 men would die because no one dared step in. And then, before she even realized she'd made the choice, his voice filled the room. I'm going in. The words hung there, heavy as thunder. Every head turned. His face flushed red. You will stand down, Sergeant. That is an order. But spoke before she could answer. His voice was calm, steel under it. SEAL lives take precedence. She goes. For a breath, no one moved. Then the room burst into orders and scrambling, men rushing to get her gear, the drone feed adjusting. At the minefield's edge, did something that made the air itself go still. She unlaced her boots, pulled off her socks. Barefoot. Gasps rippled through the team, someone cursed under his breath. She remembered a story her mother once told her, passed down from an old Green Beret who had fought in Vietnam, about Montagnard fighters who cleared fields with nothing but their feet, sensing the soil's whispers. The method was rare, desperate, but effective. The earth spoke differently through skin. Her first step pressed into the dirt, slow, deliberate. Her toes curled, feeling density changes, searching for the subtle give of disturbed soil. The probe in her hand touched metal 6 inches from where her boot would have landed. She marked it with a small flag, heart steady, breath measured. Behind her, silence. The drone feed streamed her every move back to the operations center, where men who doubted her now held their breath. She kept moving, inch by inch, step by step. And as she went deeper into the field, the memory of his voice echoed in her mind. Women crack under pressure. Her bare foot pressed into the soil, and she thought, watch me. How long could a man stand still with death beneath his boots? Petty Officer Stevens didn't know anymore. His calf muscles screamed, locked in one position since the moment he felt the click. Sweat poured down his back, but he couldn't wipe it. His breath came shallow, terrified that even a chest expanding too far might tip the balance. 8 pounds. That was all. 8 pounds of pressure between survival and the mind snapping his life away, and the lives of every brother around him. He wanted to close his eyes. He didn't dare. And then, through the green haze of the night vision lens strapped to his helmet, he saw her. Barefoot, walking toward him. At first his brain rejected it. It looked wrong, surreal. A woman moving barefoot across a minefield, as if her skin alone could whisper secrets the rest of them couldn't hear. Her steps were painfully slow. Minutes stretched into eternities, but she kept coming, calm, silent. Stephen's throat tightened. Whoever she was, whatever she was doing, she was the only hope they had left. Back in the operations center, the silence was so thick it felt like a physical weight. Screens glowed, keyboards clicked, but no one spoke. Major stood at the center, his face locked, jaw twitching, knowing his authority had been stripped in front of everyone. The younger specialists leaned forward, eyes fixed. They whispered without sound, as if even their breath might travel through the drone feed and shatter her concentration. Focus narrowed to a tunnel. The world beyond the dirt at her feet blurred. Every grain mattered. Every shift of soil, every tiny vibration beneath her skin was a voice she had to hear. Her bare foot pressed down. She felt the slight give, the unnatural softness where the earth had been disturbed decades ago. Her toes curled, registering what her eyes couldn't see. Probe in her hand, she angled it forward, slow, gentle, until it tapped metal beneath the surface. There it was, a PMN2 mine Soviet-made. Her mother's notes had sketches of them, diagrams with scribbles in the margins, trigger plate sensitive, plastic casing hard to detect, designed to maim, not kill. She marked the spot with a tiny strip of red cloth, barely breathing. One step avoided, dozens more to go. She moved again. Her foot hovered, lowered, paused, shifted. Every motion was deliberate, no room for error, not one. In her chest, her heart beat steady, too steady. It reminded her of how she'd always been different. In training, when other recruits shook at their first live fuse, her hands stayed still. In firefights, when adrenaline spiked through her comrades, her body betrayed nothing. Calm wasn't a choice. It was who she was when the world demanded chaos. But calm didn't mean empty. Beneath her skin, emotions pressed like trapped gas, anger, grief, defiance. She kept them caged because out here cages were survival. Another mine, another red strip, another eternity. Minutes turned into 40, then 50. Each step forward was a lifetime. Halfway through the field, she froze. The soil shifted wrong, too shallow, too loose. Her probe scraped and she found it, an old mine that had shifted over time. The pressure plate tilted upward at an angle, exposed in a way that created a choke point. There was no room to go around. Standard protocol screamed retreat. No specialist would risk it. Even her mother's notes had warnings in thick handwriting: avoid choke points. They kill the careful. But the SEALs didn't have retreat, and neither did she. Dropped flat onto the dirt. Her body pressed against the earth, spreading her weight across every inch. Breath shallow, ribs barely moving, she crawled, inch by inch. The pressure plate flexed under her forearm, groaning against decades of rust. Her skin prickled with cold sweat. Her mind whispered her mother's voice: don't fight the fear, listen to it. It tells you what matters most. Her chest brushed soil, her hands probed forward, and slowly, painfully slowly, she slid past the mine. When she reached the other side, she stayed there a moment, face against the earth, heart thudding in her ears. She thought of Diana again, of that coffin she hadn't been allowed to open, of the silence at the funeral, filled with whispers about sacrifice, about courage, about the price of service. None of them had known what it really meant, but she did now. She pushed herself up, kept moving. Stevens could barely feel his legs anymore. Cramps knotted muscle against bone, and tears burned his eyes, not from pain, but helplessness. He trained for every scenario. He'd endured drown-proofing, hypothermia, torture resistance, but nothing prepared you for standing perfectly still, waiting for death to decide whether it cared enough to take you. And now there she was, 30 feet away, 20, 15. Each step she took stole his breath. His eyes met his. Just for a second she gave nothing away. No smile, no nod, just presence. That was enough. She crouched low, probe sliding into the dirt near his boot. Slowly, carefully. The scrape of metal meeting plastic filled the silence in his head. She worked around the pressure plate, hands steady, muscles taut with precision. Then from her pouch she a safety pin, thin, gleaming in the night vision. She angled it, slid it, coaxed it into the arming channel. Click. The sound was soft, barely audible, but for Stevens it was the sound of the world breathing again. His legs almost buckled. She caught his gaze. "Don't move yet," she whispered, voice low, firm. "Not until I guide you." She began to backtrack, slowly, revering each step she had taken. Her feet pressed into the same imprints, her mind replaying the path like a recording. One by one she reached the others, each man frozen in his private hell, waiting for her touch. She guided them, turned their fear into obedience, walked them back along the path she'd carved. The operations center remained silent. Every specialist, every officer, even watched with wide eyes as she moved. A woman they had doubted, a soldier they had dismissed, barefoot in a minefield leading America's most elite warriors to safety. Minutes stretched into hours. By the time the last SEAL crossed the perimeter, his legs ached, her body drenched in sweat, her feet raw and bleeding from hidden stones. But she didn't stumble, she didn't waver. She stepped out of the minefield, the final barrier crossed. And then the sound came, a sound she hadn't expected. Applause. Soft at first, just a single pair of hands from one of the younger specialists who couldn't hold it in, then more, then the room filled with it. His face was pale, he didn't clap, he didn't look at her. Stood still, dirt clinging to her skin, the SEALs behind her silent, their eyes fixed on her with something deeper than gratitude. Respect. Awe. Commander walked forward. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "She just saved 6 of my men. That's more than leadership. That's more than courage. That's what heroism looks like." Lowered her eyes. Heroism. The word felt foreign. All she had done was the work. The work her mother had taught her mattered more than anything else. But inside her chest something shifted. Not pride, not yet, something softer, something almost like release. She had proven what she didn't need to prove. And yet, why did it still ache that she'd had to? Why was it so hard to breathe when the danger was over? Sat alone on the edge of her bunk, boots still in her hands. She hadn't laced them yet. Her bare feet were torn raw, skin scraped open by stones hidden in the minefield's dirt. Each cut stung, but none of it compared to the strange emptiness inside her chest. She had walked into death's teeth, guided 6 men back alive, and now silence. Not complete silence. Outside, the base stirred. Radios hummed, vehicles rumbled, soldiers shouted in clipped bursts of energy. But inside her small quarters, time slowed. The adrenaline that had carried her steady through every step now left her drained. A hollowness filled the space it abandoned. She looked down at her hands. They didn't shake. They never did, but they should have. Some part of her wanted them to tremble, to release the storm she kept caged. Instead, they lay calm on her knees, the skin etched with faint lines of dirt she hadn't washed away. She thought of Stephen's eyes, the moment their gazes locked while his body froze in terror. He had looked at her like she was the last thread between him and the abyss. That kind of trust weighed heavier than any pack she'd carried. A knock tapped at her door, sharp, hesitant. A voicemail, soft. She opened the door to find Stevens himself, out of uniform, exhaustion lining his face. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at her as if words refused to form. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out something small. A coin. The kind SEALs carried, each one etched with a unit's insignia. "This," he said, pressing it into her hand, "belongs to you now." She stared at it, the weight of the cold metal pressing into her palm. Challenge coins weren't given lightly. They weren't medals pinned in ceremonies. They were personal, sacred, a bond between warriors. "I don't," she started. "You do," he interrupted, his voice cracked. "I've seen men do insane things, but I've never seen anyone do what you just did. Barefoot, alone, into hell. That's not courage, that's something I can't even explain. You didn't just save us, you changed us." His eyes glistened, unashamed. Closed her hand around the coin. For the first time that night, her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him it wasn't about courage, that it was about duty, about knowledge, about the notes her mother had left behind. She wanted to tell him about the promise she'd made at 16, staring at a coffin that would never open. But she couldn't. The words stayed locked inside. "Thank you," was all she managed. When he left, the silence returned. But the coin remained in her hand, warm now, as if it carried more than just metal. In the operations center the next morning, no one looked in the eye. He stood rigid, issuing clipped orders, but the pale set of his face betrayed him. Word had spread. A room full of specialists had watched him dismiss as unfit hours before she walked barefoot into a minefield and saved 6 SEALs he would have written off. Politics moved slower than war, but even he knew the tide had turned. Didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice or throw accusations. He simply made one call to Naval Special Warfare Command. By nightfall, the Pentagon knew everything. Didn't ask for that. She didn't want it. She wanted only the quiet discipline of her work. Yet recognition, once unleashed, had a way of finding its target whether wanted or not. 2 days later, she stood stiff in formation as the bronze star with valor was pinned to her chest. Cameras flashed. Words were spoken about bravery and sacrifice. His name never came up, but the shadow of his failure lingered over every syllable. Stephen stood in the crowd, face solemn, his coin still mirrored in her mind. When the ceremony ended, he approached her again. "You know what I'll remember," he said. "What?" she asked, her voice careful. "The silence. Everyone in that field, we couldn't breathe, couldn't think. But you," he shook his head, almost laughing at the memory. "You moved like the noise didn't exist, like you made peace with it." She didn't answer, because peace wasn't what she'd made. It was something else, something darker. That night she couldn't sleep. The applause, the speeches, even Stephen's gratitude, all of it clashed with what echoed in her memory. The sound of the soil shifting, the subtle flex of a pressure plate beneath her weight, the knowledge that one mistake, one twitch, would have shattered 6 lives. She replayed it over and over, not the victory but the thin line she had walked. And in that loop, her mother returned again. Diana, smiling in a photo, gone in an instant by the same enemy she now hunted. Wondered if her mother had felt it too, the strange emptiness after survival, the quiet that demanded more than applause could ever fill. Days turned into weeks, operations continued. Pale and diminished, was quietly reassigned stateside, stripped of the authority he had wielded like a weapon. His replacement, Colonel Martinez, restored to full operational status without hesitation. "You've earned it," he told her simply. "No politics, just fact." But with authority came weight. Younger female specialists began drifting toward her unit, their eyes wide, questions on their lips. They wanted to learn, to see how she had done it, to prove through her that competence had no gender. She guided them patiently. She taught them the methods her mother had passed down, the habits she had forged herself. She even mentioned the barefoot technique, though carefully, warning them it was an option only when no other choice remained. But inside, she carried the memory alone. At night, she wrote, not letters, not journals, notes, observations, small details about soil density, about Soviet mine patterns, about Taliban modifications. Her handwriting mirrored her mother, in places cramped and hurried, as if she feared the knowledge would slip away if she didn't capture it fast enough. Her notebook grew thick, a legacy not of medals or speeches, but of survival carved into words. And yet, she couldn't shake the question. Why did she feel more broken in the quiet than in the storm? On her 5th night back from the minefield, she dreamt of it. She stood barefoot again, but this time the soil whispered louder, voices rising from beneath. Her probe tapped metal, but instead of mines, she uncovered fragments of her mother's uniform, bloodied, torn. She kept digging, hands frantic, until she unearthed a closed casket. Her own reflection stared back at her from the polished wood. She woke gasping, coin clenched in her hand, though she didn't remember reaching for it in her sleep. The metal on her chest felt hollow. The applause had already faded. But the silence remained. And in that silence, wondered, not for the first time, if her calm was strength, or if it was just the armor she had built to keep from shattering. Why did admiration feel heavier than doubt? Sat at the long table in the equipment bay, hands folded over her notes, while 3 young specialists leaned forward with eager eyes. They hung on her every word, nodding quickly, scribbling down her advice as if she were scripture. So when you're probing, she said quietly, voice even, it's not just about pressure and depth. Listen with your hands. Soil remembers where it's been touched. You'll feel it, sometimes a grain at a time. One of the women, barely 20, hair pulled tight, name tape reading, nodded furiously. Like you did in the minefield. The question made pause. The air seemed to thicken. She looked at, then back down at the tool in her hand. Yes, she said finally. Her voice was calm, always calm, like that. But inside, the memory twisted. His face lit with awe, the way recruits look at legends. And that, more than insults, more than the SEAL's gratitude, unsettled, because legends weren't real. They were stories stitched together from fragments, smoothed until the jagged edges disappeared. She wasn't smooth. She was full of jagged edges. When the training ended, the younger women lingered, reluctant to leave, as if just standing near her would transfer some of her resilience. One by one they drifted out, their whispers echoing down the hall. Can you believe she did that barefoot? Martinez says they're adding it to advanced training. She makes it look possible. Possible, the word lingered like a weight. Leaned back in the empty bay, staring at the tools spread before her. Her mother's voice rose in her head again. Don't fight the fear. Listen to it. But what about admiration? What about expectation? How did you listen to those without losing yourself? She didn't have an answer. That night the base cafeteria buzzed louder than usual. Soldiers packed shoulder to shoulder, trading stories, laughter rising in bursts. At one table a group of SEALs sat with trays pushed aside, deep in conversation. Slipped past them, tray in hand, hopping to fade into the background. The voice stopped her. She turned to see Commander standing. The table of SEALs quieted as every head turned toward her. Join us. It wasn't a request. Reluctantly she sat. The air around the table shifted. They didn't treat her like an outsider. They treated her like one of them. Stevens lifted his glass of water, raising it slightly. To the one who walked into hell barefoot. The others echoed softly, not rowdy, not exaggerated, just reverent. Forced a thin smile. She wanted to thank them, she wanted to accept, but the words caught. Because all she could see in that moment was the field, the endless soil, the subtle depressions that could have been her last step, the memory of crawling over a tilted plate, her body weight pressing against death, knowing it could decide differently at any second. Her fork shook slightly in her hand, the first tremor in weeks. She set it down, masked it with a sip of water. The men didn't notice, or maybe they chose not to. Later, when she left, she heard their voices carry. She saved us, and she doesn't even believe it. They were right. Back in her quarters, opened her notebook. She wrote fast, almost frantic, as if the act itself could drain the storm building in her chest. Barefoot clearance is viable. Risk reduction depends on soil type. Soviet patterns hold, but unpredictable shifts require weight distribution. Choke points crawl, always crawl. She underlined the last words 3 times, then closed the book. The bronze star lay on her desk, gleaming under the low light. She hadn't touched it since the ceremony. She couldn't. Recognition was supposed to feel like validation. Instead, it felt like being placed on a pedestal with no ground beneath. A week later, the mission came. A convoy route through province had been hit twice in 3 days. EOD teams neutralized what they could, but locals whispered about new devices, smaller, harder to detect, buried near civilian paths. The kind of devices meant not just to kill, but to terrorize. Colonel Martinez briefed the joint unit. His voice was steady, no arrogance, no politics, just facts. We need the best on this. You'll lead. No hesitation, no second guessing. The room nodded in agreement. Even the skeptics kept silent. Stood the weight settling instantly. She felt the eyes again, not with disdain this time, but with expectation. They wanted her calm. They wanted her certainty. But inside, something whispered differently. She nodded anyway. Understood, sir. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling. The fan spun above, a steady whir that should have been soothing. Instead, it sounded like the click of pressure plates. She turned her head toward her mother's photo. For years, Diana had been her compass. The silent smile in the picture had told her where true north was. But now, staring into her mother's eyes, wondered if she was following strength or chasing ghosts. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams carried her back to the minefield. Only this time the seals weren't there. She was alone, probing, crawling, bleeding. And when she looked up, she didn't see Stephen's terrified eyes. She saw her own reflection staring back from the soil, lips pressed tight, expression unreadable. She woke with her notebook in her lap, pen still in her hand, lines scribbled without meaning. Morning came with heat and with it preparation. Her team checked gear, loaded trucks, ran comms, moved among them silently, inspecting, adjusting, nodding approval. But inside her chest felt tight. The pedestal grew taller, the ground farther away. When the convoy rolled out, dust rising behind the armored vehicles, sat in the lead truck, helmet pressed against the steel frame, staring out at the Afghan mountains. She thought of, and the younger women watching her like she was proof. She thought of Stevens pressing the coin into her hand. She thought of her mother's closed casket. And beneath it all, she thought of one question that refused to leave her. Was she truly calm, or just broken in a way the world mistook for strength? The answer waited somewhere ahead, buried in the dirt of another road, hidden beneath soil that never forgot where it had been disturbed. And this time, she wasn't sure she wanted to find it. How many miles of dirt could hold death beneath its surface? The convoy moved slowly through, armored vehicles grinding over rutted roads that twisted between jagged hills. Dust rose in heavy plumes, coating the air, stinging eyes, turning every breath into grit. Soldiers scanned the roadside, rifles aimed outward, but their real enemy was beneath their wheels. Sat in the lead MRAP, visor lowered, headset crackling with comms chatter. Her kit weighed heavy across her shoulders, the familiar burden of tools she had carried for years. She felt the hum of the engine through her boots, a vibration that settled into her bones. Around her, the younger specialists in her team kept stealing glances. Seated across from her, gripped her rifle too tightly, knuckles pale. Every bump in the road made her flinch. His eyes stayed forward, calm, always calm. But inside, the silence pressed. 2 clicks, the driver muttered. We hit the stretch where the last 2 convoys took fire. Nodded, slow it down. We probe the shoulders before anything rolls forward. They halted on open ground, the dust settling slowly. The silence afterward was worse than the engine's growl. Stepped down into the heat. Her boots crunched against the gravel. She scanned the terrain, the slope of the hill, the odd depressions in the soil, the line of broken rocks that looked too deliberate to be chance. Her probe slid into the dirt. The resistance told her what her eyes could not. She knelt, brushed aside the top layer, and there it was, a device smaller than Soviet mines, crude but effective. Wires twisted together, casing nearly invisible beneath the earth. Not Taliban standard, something new. She motioned for her team to stay back. Her fingers worked steady, each cut precise, every movement methodical. Sweat rolled down her temple, stinging her eyes, but her hands did not falter. "Disarmed," she said softly after 10 long minutes. Exhaled, shoulders dropping in relief. The others followed, tension breaking like a wave. But didn't relax. One device never came alone. She probed again, another, and another. A pattern emerged, subtle but deliberate, each charge set not to kill outright but to injure, to delay, to terrify. Her mother's notes flashed in her mind. Secondary devices are the real killers. Always expect the shadow behind the first threat. Her chest tightened. She moved carefully, mapping the field. Sweat soaked her uniform, the Afghan sun baking everything into a haze. Minutes blurred into an hour, then 2. Her team watched from a distance, their voices muted. At last, the last device clicked safe beneath her hand. The convoy rolled forward again, inching past the danger. Radios crackled with cautious relief, but stayed silent. That night at the forward patrol base, soldiers gathered in the mess tent, laughter breaking through the exhaustion. They clapped her on the back, offered her coffee, food, gratitude. Sat close, eyes bright with something between admiration and awe. "How do you do it?" she asked quietly when the others had drifted away. "You walk into it like the mines don't scare you." Looked at her, the younger woman's face glowing with naive belief. She wanted to say the truth, that the fear was constant, that it lived under her skin, that she carried her mother's ghost with every step. She wanted to say the calm wasn't peace, it was armor. But the words stuck. Instead, she said, "Fear is part of the job, you just don't let it own you." Nodded as if that answer was enough. Looked away. Later, alone in her bunk, she opened her notebook. She wrote with hands steady but mind storming. New pattern, smaller devices, designed for terror more than kill. Secondary placements confirm intent. Soil tells the story, listen to it. She paused, pen hovering. Then, without meaning to, she wrote another line. "Sometimes I wonder if the soil remembers faces." The words startled her. She shut the book quickly, pressing her palm against the cover as if to trap the thought inside. But the image lingered, faces in the dirt, her mother among them. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it came with dreams, her crawling again, chest pressed to soil, but instead of minds, it was photographs buried beneath. Her mother's smile, Stephen's pale terror, its wide-eyed awe. She unearthed them one by one until the field was covered with faces staring at her, waiting for her to guide them out. She woke gasping, hand clutched around the challenge coin again. The missions kept coming. Each road carried new traps, new devices, new scars hidden in the earth, cleared them all. Efficient, professional, a machine of calm precision. But every step deepened the silence inside her. The SEALs visited sometimes, nodding at her in respect, offering words of gratitude. And the younger specialists followed her like a shadow, learning, imitating, trusting her without question. And still, when she looked in the mirror, she saw the cracks, the tremor she buried, the weight she couldn't name. One evening, after a particularly grueling day clearing a village path where children had nearly triggered a device, sat outside alone, the Afghan sky stretching endless above. Stars scattered bright, cold, and unblinking. Stevens found her there. He didn't speak at first. He just sat beside her, silence stretching long. Finally, he said, "Do you ever let yourself feel it?" She didn't answer. "Because I do," he continued. His voice was rough, honest. "That day in the minefield, I thought I was already dead. When you walked toward me, it was the first time in my life I wasn't ashamed to be terrified. I think about it every night, and I feel it. Every damn time. His eyes stayed on the horizon. He looked at her. But you never let it show, not once. That's what scares me. Not the mines, not the Taliban, because I don't know how you carry all of it and stay that calm. She turned her head slowly. Her voice was low. What if I'm not carrying it? What if it's carrying me? The words hung between them, heavier than the night air. Stephen studied her face, but she gave nothing more. The stars kept burning, cold and silent. And deep down, knew the next mission wouldn't just test her hands. It would test whether her calm was strength, or the mask of someone already breaking. How many times could a person stare at death before it stared back? The convoy rolled into Provence under a blood-red dawn. The sky burned with early light, washing the barren hills in shades of rust. The road stretched narrow and broken, weaving through villages where doors hung open but no children played. It was too quiet. Sat in the second vehicle, visor lowered, headset alive with radio chatter. Sat behind her, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. The girl's tension filled the cabin like smoke. "Looks clear," the lead driver muttered over comms. His gaze stayed fixed on the dirt ahead. Clear was a word that meant nothing. Minutes later the vehicle halted. The road curved sharply, flanked by walls of stone, too tight, too convenient. Colonel Martinez's voice crackled. "This one's yours." She stepped down into the silence, boots crunching against gravel. The air smelled of dust and smoke, faint but lingering. She scanned the ground, depressions, broken lines, irregular shading. Something felt wrong, not the pattern of Taliban devices, not Soviet, different. Her probe slid into the soil. Resistance. Then a click too faint to trigger but enough to warn her. She brushed the dirt aside. It wasn't a standard IED. It was new. A pressure plate wired in a way she hadn't seen before, designed to mimic the Soviet layout but altered, twisted, deceptive. Someone had studied, someone had learned. She felt the muscles in her neck tighten. Behind her's voice trembled. That's not in the manual, is it?" Didn't answer right away. Her hands moved steady, neutralizing the device with careful cuts, isolating wires, disarming power. When it was safe, she looked up. "No," she said quietly, "it's not." Her team exchanged nervous glances. She moved forward, probing again. Another device. Different again. This one hidden deeper, the casing thinner, almost undetectable. She disarmed it too, but the silence in her chest grew heavier. These weren't random traps. They were lessons written in steel and wire, tailored to her. Someone out there knew how she worked. Hours dragged by. The sun rose higher, burning the valley. Sweat soaked through her uniform, her helmet pressing heat into her skull. She kept moving, step by step, device by device. 27 in all, scattered across a stretch of road less than a mile long. Her body obeyed her training. Her hands stayed calm, but inside her thoughts raced. "They're adapting, they're watching. Every pattern I know, they're breaking it." When the last device clicked safe beneath her knife, she stood slowly, knees aching, back stiff. Her radio buzzed. "Martinez, status." "Clear," she said softly. The convoy rolled forward, engines rumbling. Her team followed, relief spilling from them like floodwater. But stayed still a moment longer, staring at the dirt. She could feel it, a presence in the soil, a mind on the other side, waiting, learning. That night back at base cornered her in the bay. "I don't understand," she said, voice pitched high. "How did you know where to step? How did you know what to do when none of it matched?" Set her tools down carefully, one by one. She looked at the younger woman, saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear she'd seen in Stevens that night in the minefield. "I didn't," she admitted. "Blinked, but you were calm, you." "I wasn't sure," cut in. Her voice was sharper than she meant. She softened it. "I trusted what I've learned, but today was different." His face paled. "So what do we do if they keep changing it?" Didn't answer because she didn't know. Later in her quarters, she opened her notebook. Her hand shook, not visibly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that she felt it. They're watching, devices tailored to confuse patterns, adapting faster than manuals, need new rules, need. Her pen stalled, her chest tightened. She dropped the pen, pressing her palms against her temples. Her mother's voice whispered in memory, "Don't fight the fear, listen to it." But the fear didn't sound like her mother anymore. It sounded like the soil itself, whispering back, mocking her calm. She slammed the notebook shut. Sleep didn't come. When it did, it came jagged, fractured. She dreamed of the minefield again, but this time she wasn't barefoot. She was blindfolded. Her probe tapped against nothing. Her feet pressed into emptiness. Around her, voices whispered, Stevens, her mother, all blending together, all asking the same question. How long until you break? She woke with a cry caught in her throat, sweat soaking her sheets. Her hands, steady in daylight, shook in the darkness. 2 days later, another mission, another road. The pattern repeated, new devices, new tricks. One disguised as a rock, casing painted, shape carved. Another buried deep, pressure set higher to catch vehicles instead of men. Every step was a guess. Every movement an argument with death. Followed close, eyes glued to, mimicking her every action. The others did too. Their faith was total. But with every glance, every whispered, she'll know what to do, the pedestal grew taller, the ground farther away. At dusk, after the last device was cleared, sat on the bumper of the MRAP, helmet off, staring at her raw hands. Dust clung to her skin, lines of dirt etched like veins. Stevens approached again, crouching beside her. "You're quieter than usual," he said softly. She didn't look at him. You think calm is silence, but silence isn't always calm. He studied her. What do you mean? Her eyes lifted to the horizon, where the sun bled into the mountains. I mean sometimes silence is just the sound of breaking. He didn't answer, not right away. Then he said, if you ever break, don't do it alone. Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust someone else with the storm inside. But she had spent years carrying it, years burying it beneath discipline and ritual. She didn't know how to let it out. So she just nodded. That night she wrote again, words sharp, frantic, almost carved into the page. They're adapting, every device a message, every message a question, how long until I break? Her hand stilled. She stared at the last line, heart pounding. For the first time, she didn't close the notebook. She left it open on the desk, the words exposed, as if daring the room itself to answer. And in the silence, she thought she heard it whisper back. How much weight could trust carry before it crushed the one who bore it? The morning was sharp, the air cold enough to bite. The convoy crept along a dusty track near the land, flat and exposed, every ripple of dirt a possible grave. Walked point this time, boots pressing into soil that felt too soft, too pliant. Behind her followed, probe in hand, eyes locked on every movement made. She mirrored her perfectly, the way she placed her feet, the way she tested the ground, the way she tilted her head as if listening for secrets in the silence. It unnerved. Maintain spacing, she called softly over her shoulder. Yes, Sergeant, replied, but she didn't slow. Her shadow clung too close. Pressed forward, her probe struck metal, another device crude but effective. She marked it, neutralized it, and kept moving. Whispered, almost reverent, you make it look easy. His chest tightened. She wanted to snap at her, to say it wasn't easy, that it was never easy, that every second was a knife's edge. But the words caught. She stayed silent. They reached a stretch where the soil looked untouched, flat, smooth, deceptively clean. Crouched low, studying it. Her instincts screamed. It was too perfect. She probed carefully, inch by inch. Nothing, again, nothing. Her breath slowed. This was wrong. Impatient, stepped forward. Wait, hissed. Too late. A sharp click cracked the silence. froze mid-step, one boot pressing into the soil. Her eyes went wide, terror filling her face. Blood ran cold. The team behind them stopped instantly, every breath suspended. The world narrowed to two women standing in a field of death, one frozen, one staring at the breaking point she had dreaded. His voice trembled. "Sergeant, I." "Don't move," said voice sharp, steady. "Not an inch." She dropped to her knees, probe sliding into the soil around boot. Sweat stung her eyes, but her hands didn't falter. She brushed dirt away grain by grain until the shape revealed itself. Not Soviet, not Taliban, something else. A hybrid, crude wire spliced with precision that didn't belong in this valley. Whoever made it had studied the patterns she'd beaten before and twisted them into something new. Whimpered, breath shallow. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't." Quiet, snapped, harsher than she intended. She softened her tone. "Focus on me, nothing else, just me." Her probe slid deeper, tracing the casing, the pressure plate. Her mind raced, recalling every sketch in her mother's notebooks, every training lesson, every mistake she had witnessed. Nothing matched. Her heart pounded. For the first time in years, her calm trembled. Slip quivered. "You can do this, you always." Cut her off. "Stop, don't say that. I'm not a myth. I'm not invincible. I'm just a soldier, same as you. Do you hear me?" His eyes filled. "But you're the reason I." "Do you hear me?" Pressed, voice fierce. A pause, then a nod, tiny, trembling. Exhaled, forcing her heartbeat back into rhythm. Probe, knife pin. Her tools danced in silence, hands steady even as her chest screamed. Every second stretched, the weight of the girl's trust pressing heavier than any bomb suit. Finally, with painstaking precision, she slid the safety pin into place. Click. The sound echoed, louder than a gunshot. Sat back, shoulders heavy, sweat soaking through her uniform. "It's safe," she said, voice low. Staggered back, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. She collapsed onto her knees, sobs shaking her. The rest of the team exhaled in unison, voices cracking with relief over the comms. But didn't celebrate. She stared at the device, heart hammering, mind replaying the click, the near death, the weight of blind faith. Back at base, the younger woman clung to her. "I almost killed us both. I." Silenced her with a look. "You didn't kill us, but you can't follow blindly. You can't think I always know. You have to think for yourself." Nodded, shame flooding her eyes. When she left, sat alone in the bay. The silence pressed harder than ever. Her notebook lay open on the table. She picked up her pen, hand hovering. "Today she almost died because she believed I couldn't fail. That's the most dangerous lie. The soil doesn't care about myths. It doesn't care about medals. It only remembers weight. One step too heavy, one moment too close, and everything ends." Her hand trembled. For once she let it. She pressed the pen down, ink blotting the page, messy, imperfect. Stevens found her there hours later. He leaned against the doorway, quiet. "You saved her," he said simply. Didn't look up. "I almost didn't." "But you did." She set the pen down, eyes burning. "What happens the day I don't, Stevens? What happens when the myth breaks?" He stepped closer, voice low. "Then you'll still be what you've always been, human, and that's enough." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let the words sink in. But the image of terrified eyes replayed again and again, louder than anything else. That night she dreamed of the minefield again. But this time she wasn't the one Barefoot was, and watched from the edge, paralyzed, unable to step in. She woke with tears on her cheeks, the coin in her fist, and one truth she couldn't shake. Calm wasn't endless. Myths couldn't last forever. And tomorrow, the soil would be waiting again. How many times could you walk back from death before you left part of yourself behind? The call came before dawn. A convoy had struck an IED outside, one vehicle destroyed, survivors pinned down, the road laced with secondary devices. Pulled her vest over tired shoulders, strapped her helmet, checked her tools. Her reflection in the cracked mirror didn't look like a hero. Just a woman worn thin, lines etched at the corners of her eyes, dirt ground into skin. Appeared at her side, gear clutched tight, jaw set. There was fear there, yes, but also determination. A reflection of herself years ago. "You don't have to," began. "Yes, I do," cut in. They rolled out under a sky bruised with clouds. The air carried the promise of rain, rare and heavy. The convoy halted near the blast site. Smoke still curled from the wrecked MRAP ahead. The survivors huddled behind cover, trapped by the suspicion of more mines. Stepped down, boots sinking into damp earth. The soil was dark, heavy with moisture, harder to read, harder to trust. She crouched, probe sliding in, listening with her hands. Nothing again, nothing. Her chest tightened. Followed close, eyes scanning every move. Too close, always too close. Spacing, murmured. Nodded but didn't retreat far. They found the first device buried deep, casing slick with wet soil. Disarmed it, every cut careful, deliberate. She marked the safe path, moved forward. But the devices, every step another. Wires tangled like veins, placements too calculated to be random. Whoever built this field hadn't been sloppy. They had been patient. She thought of her mother's notes. The enemy adapts, they watch, they learn. Her heart pounded harder. An hour passed, then two. Her knees ached, her fingers raw, her body soaked in sweat and rain. The soil clung to her hands, cold, unyielding. Then it happened. Eager probed too quickly. Her rod struck something sharp, metal ringing faintly beneath the soil. She froze. Spun, eyes locking on her. "Don't move," she said, voice low, sharp. His breath came fast, shallow. I didn't." "Quiet." Dropped to her knees beside her, hands digging into the wet earth. The casing appeared, small, delicate, a booby trap designed to punish mistakes. Her hands moved steady, but inside her mind screamed, "Not again, not her." His whisper cracked. "Sergeant, I trusted you, I thought." His throat burned. She wanted to shout, to tell her not to trust so blindly, not to place faith in a myth. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when one wrong breath could end them both. She worked the wires, knife slicing, fingers pinning, breath held. Rain pattered against her helmet, water dripping into the soil, making the ground slick. Click. The pin slid in, the plate locked. "Safe." Gasped, tears mixing with rain. Sat back, chest heaving. Her hands, for the first time, trembled where the others could see. The team behind them froze. No one spoke. Forced herself to stand, to keep moving, but every step felt heavier. The pedestal cracked beneath her feet. By dusk, the last device was cleared. The survivors evacuated, the road safe again. Back at base, Martinez gave her the look commanders reserve for the ones who saved lives too many times to count. "You kept them alive," he said simply. But shook her head, "Barely." He frowned, "Barely is still alive." She walked away. That night she sat alone in her quarters, the storm outside pounding rain against the roof. Her notebook lay open, pages filled with years of survival, diagrams, notes, lessons, warnings. She stared at the words, then at her hands. For the first time she allowed herself to feel the weight, not just of minds, not just of missions, but of eyes, Stevens. Every young soldier who looked at her like proof that strength had no weakness. Her mother's photo hung above the desk. Diana's smile steady, confident, frozen in a moment before everything ended. Whispered into the quiet, "Did you ever feel like this? Did you ever wonder if the calm was just another kind of breaking?" No answer came, only the rain. She picked up her pen. Her hands shook, but she wrote anyway. "Legacy isn't medals. Legacy isn't myths. It's the notes we leave behind. It's the lives we keep breathing another day. It's the silence between fear and action and the choice to step anyway." She underlined the last words twice. When dawn came, knocked softly at her door. opened it, exhaustion heavy in her eyes. Stood then before her, fear tempered now, her voice steady. Teach me, not how to be you, how to survive as me. His chest tightened, she nodded slowly. Because that was the truth. Myths broke, pedestals cracked, but teaching someone to walk their own path that endured. Years later, after deployments blurred into one another, after promotions came and command stripes marked her chest, his office wall held two photos. Her mother in Iraq, herself in the minefield. Between them hung a plaque, plain, unpolished, the words etched simple. Excellence needs no permission. And those who visited, young specialists, SEALs, commanders, always left with the same impression, not of a legend, not of a myth, but of a woman who carried fear, who carried silence and still stepped anyway. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.